Welcome to the Music Life podcast from the BBC World Service. Hello, this is Ahmed Jalab, also known as Sin Kane. I make funky music mixed with elements of jazz, dance, and Sudanese haqiba. My first instrument was the drums, but I also play many other instruments, guitar, bass, keys. I also sing. I started out as a session musician and I worked with Caribou, Yeser, Of Montreal, and many others before releasing my debut EP as Sin Kane in 2007. Last year, I released my latest album, Depaysé, which is about self-discovery as an immigrant in the United States. Earlier this year, I released a live album recorded at Space Bomb Studios called Gettin' Weird. Music Life is a show where 4 artists from around the world get together to discuss all aspects of a life in music. A podcast episode is released every Friday, ahead of being broadcast on the World Service on Saturdays and Sundays. So subscribe to where you get your podcast to be sure not to miss any. You can also find loads of other great episodes at the website, featuring the likes of Hans Zimmer, Mickey Blanco, Iggy Pop, Pongo, plus lots of playlists to listen to. Head to bbcworldservice.com/musiclife. Joining me today are David Byrne, St. Vincent, and Vagabond. We'll be talking about how we achieve making a sound that feels authentically ours, whether we make music for people to move their feet or to feed their minds, and how our American identity affects our work. So let's begin.
Hi.
Hi,
Leticia.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Pleasure to meet you. How are you?
So good to meet you.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
All
Good to
right.
hear you again.
Yeah.
I started making music like 15 years ago. You know, it was my first time I really went into doing my own thing. And before that, I'd been playing in so many different bands and I was very collaborative. And I always found myself thinking, oh, nothing is quite right, you know. And I started Sin Kane as this experience to find myself, you know. So from the beginning, the idea was like, oh, I live in this sandbox and I can create whatever I want. And I found myself making an album and then going another direction completely. And it was like this new understanding of myself. Change for me was important in this really weird way because it was something that I wanted to do from the outset, but I never knew where I was going to go, you know? So it kind of like created and manifested this new identity per album and learned something new about myself. David, what does it mean for you to exist in different creative contexts?
I grew up with the idea from the artists that I admired that every record's supposed to be a little bit different, which in a certain way, it's nice because it kind of prods you to try something new. On the other hand, it seems a little bit unfair. Just because you're doing something different doesn't mean it's better, and it doesn't mean it's actually good. And so to constantly just be feeling this pressure to do something different, sometimes you maybe you're not finished with the kind of whatever it was you were doing. Maybe you got more to say in that world. I'm kind of trapped in that idea, and I've managed to deal with it pretty well. Sometimes by working with other people, like doing music for a theater production, which Ahmed, you're doing that now, and I've done that in different ways, and that works that way. You end up having a very different set of restrictions and rules and whatever, and many times in those kind of situations, it's kind of more about storytelling. You have to imagine yourself as being another person, another character, and write from their point of view, which is fun. It gives you kind of license and lets you escape from the idea that you're always writing about yourself. I mean, I know that's what this show is about, but sometimes it gets to be a little bit much talking about yourself all the time.
That's really good to hear, you know. It's very kind of soothing to hear that.
Yeah, what David says resonates with me a lot, partially because he is just one of my absolute favorites. So I would have picked up that idea from you, David, that that you picked up from others, that every record is supposed to be different and growth. And I think for me, now I feel so exhilarating to kind of, at the outset of a record, even if you don't stick to the theme, to sort of start there and go, okay, this is the direction I'm heading in. And then, of course, be open to the fact that it might change completely, but at least you have a starting point. And I found more and more that with every record, I really get to live in that character, whether it's a couple years and watch that character grow. And when I say character, I really just kind of mean something that lives inside of me that's a an ego state or whatever. It's not as if it's made out of whole cloth or a fabrication. It's just sort of a part of my personality that gets steroided for a period of time. And I find that I find it so liberating and so fun to just really live in it.
It's almost like you're outside of yourself and you're kind of experiencing this thing, but you're also the one kind of guiding everything, right?
Well, I feel very much inside it.
Oh, yeah?
I feel more and more. Yeah, I feel very inside it. It feels definitely like it's coming from the inside out. But then, of course, there's the paradox where you are object and you are also subject and you're also artist and muse all at the same time. It can get very solipsistic pretty quickly, but I find it just so exciting.
That's amazing. Leticia, I wanted to say your last two records I loved. I was so into them. And I found it really interesting. Persian Garden was such an organic record, and it like really took me back to my youth, like being in high school and listening to all these guitar records and like super emotional and then into Infinite Worlds, which was very similar, but then going to the latest record, the self-titled album, which had these beautiful lush arrangements and electronic elements, and it seemed like there was so much growth, like so much change between those two parts of you. And then the album is also a self-titled record, which like we've all had self-titled records between all of us here, right? And they're kind of these statement records, and I was really curious about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely feel like I resonate with what David and Annie said. And it's interesting because for my last record, I really felt like, when you speak of that, like that growth that happened between Infinite Worlds and the self-titled record, it really almost was like intentional. Like I've only been making music for, I started writing songs and making music in 2015. And so from Infinite Worlds to come out in 2017 and this one to come out late last year, I really just kind of studied a lot. I was more focused and more like it was my entire thing. It was all that I did. Versus when I was making Infinite Worlds, I was in engineering school and I was working as a coder. And so, when we talk about change, I really I kind of freaked out when I was making the self-titled because it was so different from my other records. I was scared of what that personality change would do or how it would be, but I really feel like there are so many different versions of me, as everyone here on the call has said. I feel like there are so many different versions of me and I want to explore them, and I feel like it's a really crucial time in my making music to really see what they're all about. So I wanted to explore what it's like to play with all these different instruments and to make things sound different and to try them for the first time and see what could happen. Because I think there's a really nice thing that happens when I go into something blindly or something that I haven't done before.
Yeah, when you're like fully present.
Yeah.
When you kind of go in. I totally relate to that feeling of being freaked out. I remember the first couple of albums I made when I finished, it was almost like I came out of this haze and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, now I have to share this with everyone and they get to see this.
Can I ask a question? Leticia, sure. You went to engineering school. So do you think any of that informed the way you approach music?
Formulaic wouldn't be the word, but just the analytical aspect of it, because what I was taught in school and I was a double engineering major. And so what is kind of, you're taught to be like a problem solver and to analyze problems in this very scientific way. And I think music is very free form in the way that I make it. I really don't assign like a math to it. But I think in my production, in my ability to be a producer, I find that my background in engineering was very helpful for the production end more than the songwriting or the singing or even the arrangements of songs.
That's so interesting because your music sounds so visceral to me, and like, engineering is such a cerebral thing, it's such a heady and techie thing, but like in that process, you created this thing that's so visceral and like immersive almost. You know, your latest record, it just feels that way.
Thank
pretty
you.
cool.
Thank you.
You're listening to BBC World Service, and this is Music Life. I'm Sudanese-American musician Sin Kane, joined by musician David Byrne, producer St. Vincent, and multi-instrumentalist Vagabond. Does your American identity show in your songwriting, and how so? I came to the United States when I was really young. My family emigrated to the U.S. in 1989. I was 5 years old, and I moved around quite a bit until I landed in New York about 12 years ago. New York was like the first time that I ever felt American. You know, you walk down the streets in New York and you hear 4 different languages in the span of a mile, and you hear so many different kinds of music in that same mile stretch, you know. And I also kind of replicated that and created that with my band as a very colorful band, people from all over the world, but also distinctly American, you know. And, you know, so often we find ourselves going outside of, as Americans, we find ourselves going outside of America to draw some sort of influence, you know, be it to Latin America or Japan or Asia or Southeast Asia, or all these different places that have music that seems inherently different from what we know. And I find myself intersecting all that together to kind of create what it is that is Sin Kane.
I was also born in Cameroon and immigrated here as a teenager, and I think how being a Cameroonian American informs my music is it's here. You know, we moved immediately to New York, so New York is the home that I know in this country, and being here and hearing the music, I'm mostly consumed pop music. I mostly consumed music from the radio, and I think coming here and listening to the songs that were on the radio and, you know, being obsessed with like Mariah Carey or Destiny Child or whatever kind of started my thinking of even writing songs in a way that I couldn't even dream that up when I lived in Cameroon, despite being in a pretty musical space. My grandmother was a choir director, and I didn't really see music as something that I could work on until I got here and was exposed to American pop music.
Like you both, my parents immigrated here when I was young, but I'm wondering if you guys had a similar experience. Despite feeling that I was very American, I was also kind of, through my parents and their culture, I could step outside of being American. And I could say, oh, this is what Americans do. This is what my family does, something different, but this is what Americans do. They like to drive everywhere, or whatever.
They like to watch TV.
They love to watch TV. But so I felt like I was inside and outside at the same time. I could kind of jump back and forth. I could kind of view things from the outside and go, oh, this is what Americans do. I better learn how to do that.
That reminds me of a funny story. So growing up in the U.S., I would leave the day after school was out to go back to Sudan and spend the entire summer in Sudan. And that was my life from when I was maybe 8 years old until 24. And any expat will tell you, like, you get like this laundry list from your family back home being like, hey, bring me stuff.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's always like the latest fashion or CD or cassette. I remember my friends in the United States being like, hey, I really want a dashiki. Can you come me dashiki? When, like, dashikis aren't a thing in Sudan. It's East Africa. It's very caricature of like African culture to an American, right?
Oh no.
But the funny thing is, it got to a point where my cousins in Sudan would be like, yo, I've been really, really into hip hop, and I want you to bring me back home a dashiki. Because at the time, the early 90s, that was like the Afrocentric thing was happening in hip hop, right? So this idea of what it meant to be American or what it meant to be African was like in the ether, you know, it didn't exist in either culture, you know, like there was this caricature of like what a Black American was to my Sudanese family and my Sudanese friends, and then there was a caricature of what then an African or African culture was to my American family, you know. And I was like kind of stuck in between in this very interesting space, and I was like, wow, this is real, you know.
Yeah, totally.
I immigrated to New York from Texas.
Oh yeah.
And I would say that growing up in Texas, I kind of wholesale rejected anything too Texan. People loved country music, and I was like, ugh, that's not my music. I like Sonic Youth or what, But then, I went around the world and I saw things, and now I feel such a weird kinship with country music and blues and that this sort of deeply American music, the leather bootstrap kind of music, and it really moves me now. But I rejected it all at first.
You don't really play like blues style, though. I would say. I'm sure you could.
I can go there. Every guitar player can sort of go there, but it's a question of should I.
I think we could safely say, Annie, that you fit into the pantheon of the classic American shredder. I think you're on I think you're on that mountain.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
Annie, I would like to ask you, do you make music to make people think, or do you make it to make people move?
That's a good question. And I mean this with a lot of love and respect and compassion for the audience. I don't think I think about an audience when I'm making things.
Really?
Yeah, because I kind of feel like you can't control how people react to it, and you shouldn't. So yeah, I mean, I'm obsessed with how does this feel, and how is the bass and drums relating to each other, and how's this texture of this melody, and
so it's strictly visceral for you. It's very emotional.
The experience is emotional. The nuts and bolts of writing is funny because I think is so exciting at some points, and then so just trawling the bottom of yourself.
Leticia, you also, do you make music to make people think, or do you make music to make people move? Or
I make music to make people move and to hopefully move people. I don't really make music to make people think. If that's a part of it, that's great, but my intention is always to evoke a feeling that isn't very cerebral, but more organic and pure.
Where does that process start for you?
So whenever I'm writing, I tend to be of the belief that when something affects me as much as it does, in order for me to want to write about it and to process it and heal it through my music, then I can't be the only one. So I think that's kind of where it starts, is I have a want to create community around my music of people who feel the same way as I do, or feel as intensely as I do, or for my words to serve as a space, like a home for outcasts and their outcasted feelings.
Wow. Yeah, I relate to that very much. So it's almost like you're like connected to this larger network of energy, that you're tapping yourself into, or that actually taps itself into you as well, Yeah. That's amazing. Thank you for that. David, I'm curious about you, because your music is so thoughtful. You can kind of explain it somewhat academically, but it's also very, very visceral, and it's very rooted in like funky and emotional music, and I'm wondering how you're able to walk the line between making music that can be enjoyed on an ephemeral, like, body level versus feeling things academically or scholarly.
I think I've always thought that there was no conflict between the two, that you could have it both. You could have it both ways. I don't think I was able to achieve that all the time, but I thought once in a while I've been able to achieve that, where there's actually kind of an idea or something put forward, but it also comes in a kind of very emotional, personal package, which I guess is a kind of storytelling. I guess it's like when you're telling stories or writing in that kind of way, there can be a larger idea behind it, but there's a personal aspect that has to be there for you to connect with whatever the story is being told.
Yeah, I found myself like seriously in the middle of that connection while watching American Utopia. Like there was both of those kind of like harmonized in this. There's like so much synergy between those two things throughout that, and it was amazing because it's like this retrospective of your career up to now. You know, with all the amazing different things that you've done and different songs. You know, with Annie, with other collaborators, with Brian. You know, and solo stuff and Talking Head stuff is pretty awesome. Vagabond, do you go into a song with a larger idea of what you want to say, or do you just write out and feel free associate until something clicks?
Well, for me, I definitely write songs, free association, whatever comes to me at the time. I think of the listener now, unfortunately, but I wish I didn't. And, I don't exactly sit down to write about a specific thing. I'm not a very fast writer either. So it's kind of just writing in moments where I feel particularly moved or in situations where I feel moved.
Oh, interesting. Annie, do you go into a song with a larger idea, you want to say something, or do you write out and free associate until something clicks?
My process is anything that gets me there. So sometimes that's having a very clear story in my head, because you go, this is a narrative that if somebody closed their eyes, they could picture. They could picture you walking down the street. They could picture you, picking up a flower from the cement or whatever it is, and then if you make people feel better about being human, then they feel more alive, and then they have a better chance of being sort of empathetic in their life. So that's my, at least my logic path. But no, it's like I just trust that if I talk pretty honestly about my human experience, that other people will be able to relate to it. So sometimes it's very narrative like that. And David, I feel like we've talked a lot about this, and I learned a lot about this from you. Sometimes I just start singing, and words suggest themselves and phrases come out, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I think as David is so great at a feeling of like kind of manic ecstasy. I'm thinking about stuff on Remain in Light. It feels like you're just kind of bursting forth, like you are on the precipice of epiphany the entire time.
It's funny where your brain goes when you let go, right? Like, as you said, sometimes you just sing, and something comes out and you're like, wow, this is really compelling. I might not understand what this is right now, but it's pretty compelling. And like, that kind of ties into Remain in Light, because it wasn't Remain in Light, David, correct me if I'm wrong, that record was built off of getting into a room and jamming.
Exactly. It was, and the tracks that I would improvise vocals to were a lot funkier and more rhythmic than some of the ones that had gone before. And so I think I was responding, like Annie was saying, I was responding to the music. And it was the music was kind of, I felt was in our own kind of slightly stiff white boy way and white girl. It was transcendent and funky. And and I felt like lyrically I had to respond to that. The lyrics had to reflect that.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thanks so much to my guests, David Byrne, St. Vincent, and Vagabond. And thank you for listening. I'm Sin Kane. Head to the website for more Music Life shows, bbcworldservice.com/musiclife. Again, thank you guys so much for taking time to have this really, really fruitful and inspiring conversation. And I know I'm going to take this with me as I'm composing and working on new music and really kind of throw it into my creative process. I really appreciate you all. I'm very inspired by all of you. And
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Nice.
No problem.
Thank you.
Really lovely to talk to you all.
Me
all right.
too. Good to meet you all.
Bye.
Leave meeting. It says here.